Hi, my name is Pam Colleen, and welcome to my podcast, Circadian Reboot, where we discuss everything circadian. And today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, and that is raw milk. And how that ties into the topic of circadian is that local and seasonal foods help to support your body's natural circadian rhythms. And today I'm pleased to announce that we're going to be talking to Mark McAfee. He is the founder and CEO of Raw Farm USA, the nation's largest producer of certified organic raw milk. A passionate advocate for raw dairy and sustainable farming practices, Mark has dedicated his career to educating consumers about the health benefits of raw milk and its role in supporting gut health and immunity. With a background as a paramedic, Mark brings a unique perspective to the raw food movement, combining firsthand medical experience with his deep knowledge of nutrition, agriculture, and food safety. Under his leadership, Raw Farm USA has become a pioneer in the raw dairy industry, prioritizing safety, transparency, and regenerative farming techniques. Mark is also a sought-after speaker and educator, regularly presenting at conferences and events to promote the importance of nutrient-dense, unprocessed foods for optimal health. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mark. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show. You and I go way back, I think 10, 15 years when we were fighting the good fight to legalize raw milk and educate people about the benefits of raw milk. And a lot has changed since we spent some time together in Toronto and I think even at one of the Weston A. Price conferences. So I want to platform off, how on earth did you, a paramedic, get involved with raw milk?
Well, my first job out of high school, I was a commercial welder in a mine up in the Sierra Nevadas, and I saw this guy get hit in the head with his timber and nearly killed him. So the helicopter came flying in with the paramedic in an orange jumpsuit and the nurse, and the rotor wash was just too much to resist. I was just too excited to not want to be on that helicopter being a care provider. So I went off and got my pre-med at junior college. And then I went off to Fresno State, finished it up a little bit. And I went to paramedic school when I became a paramedic. And I was valedictorian in my paramedic class. I absolutely loved paramedic medicine. I taught paramedic medicine for the health department for many years. And I did everything you can imagine in paramedic world for many, many years, 16 years. Ran 15,000 paramedic calls. I precepted. I was a recruiter. I was an operations manager. Did HR, all kinds of stuff. That all came to an abrupt end in 1996 when my grandparents had passed away. And there was 1,000 acres of prime agricultural land that I actually grew up on as a child out here in western Fresno County. And I completed my chapter in life as a care provider and not getting any sleep at night. Paramedic work is pretty tough. And especially with the call volumes we had, running 15, 20 calls a day was crazy. So that said, I retired from paramedic medicine and took over the family farming operations, but I did it very consciously. I wanted to serve people, not the processor. I wanted to be completely vertically integrated from the grass and the earthworms and the soil and everything there all the way to the consumer. And that quickly evolved over a couple of years of work to be Organic Pastures Dairy initially, and now it's called Raw Farm. But I grew up on a dairy when I was a child, and I wasn't a professional dairyman, but I certainly milked a lot of cows when I was a kid in high school. So I understood it, and I didn't fear cows, and I realized that the ultimate way to express products I created in the soil was to feed my cows with that organic alfalfa and have my cows produce milk that I could then sell to people. And that rapidly evolved into learning about the Stuvies and Altadena, which was a huge raw milk producer in Los Angeles. And when I discovered that in May of 1999, which was just a couple of years after retiring as a paramedic, that they had gone out of business and sold their business to Dean's Foods and were no longer producing organic milk and raw milk. They were never organic, but raw milk. There was a major opportunity there. People were saying, bring your milk to LA. Bring your milk to LA. We don't have any raw milk. And so I did, and I drove into this back alley in Venice Beach to a place called The Garage. And this is in 1999, 2000 time period. And as I was driving in to be welcomed by these people, there was just rejoicing going on. There was people jumping up and down and celebrating the arrival of the milk that they'd missed for months. And I had not seen that before. And to see that, my wife and I just basically said, what's going on here? This is amazing. And to hear the stories that the people gave us about gut healing and inflammation and allergies and skin and just go on and on and on, that resonated with myself as a paramedic, a care provider, and my wife, who was a nurse, labor and delivery. And so we left that Venice Beach garage, and my wife and I looked at each other and said, what the heck just happened? You know, we've got thousands of dollars all around the inside of our Suburban and no milk left. And people said, please come back tomorrow. You're all out. And so that was very much a seminal, foundational experience that we had. And we drove back to Fresno. This is 25 years ago now. We said, let's build a creamery immediately to produce our own milk in our own brand. And we did. We installed one right away, and raw milk's always been legal in California. Thank you to the Stuvies, and thank you to Altadena, who stood guard at the gate to make sure that it was never made illegal. And we started producing milk.
And your business has grown. Your business has grown now. You have you sell to over 550 stores now?
Roughly, yes. And nationally, much more than that with our raw milk cheeses, probably 2,000 stores. But in California, we're right around 500 stores or so. And the best we can calculate, maybe 150,000 people a week that consume our products. So, yes, we've become a real force in terms of a brand and the connection to people. And now with this whole RFK evolution occurring, where food is medicine, and he is one of my customers, he wants that same raw milk he gets in Los Angeles provided to everyone that wants it in America. So there's a major thing going on.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because there's potentially a lot of positive changes coming up with the new Trump administration if RFK is nominated to the Health and Human Services branch. He's proposing you as an advisor to the FDA. What do you think your chances are of getting that position?
Well, I was asked directly to please apply, so I didn't offer myself to do it until I was asked. So at this point, I think I want to be humble in saying this, but when you look globally about raw milk and you look at standards and how many people we've supplied raw milk with and the kind of evolution we've done in terms of technology to do testing and all that kind of stuff, there's not really a whole lot of people out there. So it would be natural for them to ask me to serve. But I want to serve kind of narrowly in that I would like to create what's called the RMO, the Raw Milk Ordinance. Right now we have a pasteurized milk ordinance, but there's no accompanying food for people versus the processor. And so I think that they sit next to each other at the FDA, where you have the pasteurized milk ordinance, and that's all fine and great, and they can continue doing what they're doing, and that's wonderful. But we're going to have the raw milk ordinance with the best team, the best vision, mission, objectives, to do three basic things, plus a couple of things, but three basic things. Establish really good standards, train the farmers in those standards, certify them, and then also do autonomous on-farm testing so farmers can themselves know what they're doing all the time to make sure that the foods they're producing are compliant with the standards. Those are the three basic things, but there's lots of other things going on too, like consumer education, changing all the website work to make sure that the public-facing part of the media talks about all these wonderful benefits and the bioactives found in raw milk that are destroyed in pasteurization. They're so health-giving. And talking about the gut microbiome and the fact that 80% of the immune system is the gut microbiome, and America's gut is just on fire with inflammation. So all those things will be educational consumer outreach. And there's continuing education and research, lots of things going on to make sure. There's also food liability standards we have to change, because you can't put these foods out into the public without insurance. And how are you going to get insurance if it's not provided at a reasonable cost? If you want to make your food available to people. So the USDA would be asked to contribute in terms of some food liability insurance for farmers that are certified. Those kinds of refinements get granular down to how you actually do it. How do you get this kind of food to people is a big thing. And so there's a lot of work around that.
Right, and I know you're also trained in HACCP as well, which is a food safety organization. I don't think a lot of people understand how well qualified you are to undertake a role as an advisor to the FDA. I think the food system will improve greatly if they could get advice from you, because so many families, so many parents want raw milk. It's growing in awareness, it's growing in terms of its education, availability. I think I heard the other day Sally Fallon was saying you can legally buy raw milk in 47 states now, where when you and I started, I think it was only 27 states. So I think it's timely that you're being nominated for this position. Now, I think a lot of people who are new to this subject need some background as to how and why this problem ever occurred. How did we lose raw milk in human history going back to the 1800s and early 1900s? And I know you're well versed in that subject.
Yes. Well, let's go back to the beginning of mammalian evolution. Mammals are defined by the fact that we are lactators. We lactate. We produce milk and feed our young. That's what mammals are. That's defined by lactation, which is breastfeeding and milk. That happened, you pick your number, 100,000, 500,000 years ago, a long time ago. Lactation became a competitive advantage to assure that the newborn, at its most compromised, most susceptible time of life, the most weak time of life, just leaving the mother's womb, would get something that transferred did three things: fully nourished, directed, and protected. Direction actually comes from all the proteins, the functional proteins that tell the body what to do, because it's no longer connected to mama. The umbilical cord is severed. So raw milk is that transfer mechanism for direction, and then also protection. There's all kinds of things found in raw milk, especially the bioactives, which actually are incredibly important in terms of controlling inflammation, virus infection, just a million things there. And I've got a whole research study on that. But the bottom line is bioactives are highly protective and nourishing. So all these things, nourishment, protection, and direction, that is Mother Nature's blueprint. Now, let's go back to about 12 to 15,000 years ago, and I suspect it was probably earlier than that, but that's the earliest time we actually have some recorded history on caves where there was a writing with blood or whatever that said that mammals were actually being domesticated, and a cow, a goat, a sheep, a horse, a camel, a reindeer was captured and fed and milked. And that milk was then being fed to the civilization that actually had a competitive advantage because of the fact they didn't have to fish, hunt, farm to find their food. They had milk. They had the other things that came from milk, like kefir, butter, cheese, all those kinds of things that came after that as well. And those things were extremely nourishing to those that had a mammal. So that was 12, 15,000 years ago. And you go through, time of Jesus, that milk wasn't pasteurized. That was raw milk, the land of milk and honey. And then you go through the Roman periods, the Dark Ages. Cows were a complement, a really important complement to civilization. And those that had cows, goats, sheep, horses, reindeer, actually had whole food nutrition and didn't starve. And they did very well. So come, let's say, 1500s, 1600s, Jamestown in America, you didn't live and survive unless you had a cow or you had a musket. If you didn't have a cow and a musket, you went back to Europe or you died. So the arrival of the first cows signaled sustainability for at least the Americans that came. The Native Americans didn't have cows, but they ate lots of organ meats and fermented foods that came from whatever animals they were domesticating at that time or hunting. So they didn't drink a lot of raw milk. Not all cultures around the world did, but many of the most successful ones did. So 1600s, 1700s, the water was clean. The pastures were plush with all kinds of grass. The cows were on vegetation. Everything was going great. Every other person in America had a cow near them in the beginning of America. There was cows everywhere, goats and sheep everywhere being used for milk. So the stock exchange was named after cows, stock, livestock. That was the initial trading. So that said, let's go to the late 1800s. In the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, people started bringing their cows into the downtown New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, and the environment was just filthy. There was no pastures. It was a muddy set of conditions with manure and mud. Typhoid fever was rampant. There was no flushing toilets, no clean water. And so, as a result, this milk that was being produced by these really dirty cows laying down in lots of manure and weren't being fed properly with good grasses and sunshine and clean water. They're being fed with brewers' distillers' grains in really filthy conditions. And that milk is being milked by hand into buckets. And just to give you an idea of how incredibly, deplorably filthy it was, these new immigrants that just come off the boat on Ellis Island were milking the cows. They themselves had tuberculosis, and the milk was warm, and they put their feet in the milk in the morning to keep their feet warm because it was so cold. So you could tell it was just filthy. And 40 to 50% of the children that would drink that milk would get really sick or die in these specific downtown brewery dairies. Now, in 1893, there was kind of a fork in the road that occurred, kind of a division of what was going down. It was called the milk problem. And a guy by the name of Nathan Strauss brought in the parboiler, which was the early form of pasteurization, which is basically a big brass pot that you poured the milk into, this dirty milk into, and you just cooked it with a big fire underneath it. And what do you know? Overnight, a lot less people died because the milk was no longer pathogenic, right? So at the same time, a guy by the name of Dr. Henry Coit, said, wait a minute, let's just clean up our act. And he established the American Association of Medical Milk Commissions, the AAMMC, and he developed this board of physicians that would go out and certify farmers that were out in the countryside. And those countrysides had clean water, grass, sunshine, clean conditions, and they made sure that the udders were clean, and the milk was chilled fairly quickly. The milk was put into a bucket in the cold water in the stream to make sure the milk was cold. And that milk was going to the Mayo Clinic of the day to heal people. And so you kind of have these two kinds of milk, the dirty milk that was excused by pasteurization, and you have the really clean milk certified by doctors. And so that went along, and literally the last dairy to be certified by the AAMMC was Altadena Dairy in Los Angeles in May of 1999. So it's very interesting that we inherited from them that fantastic lineage, that whole history of milk going back to the 1800s at Raw Farm. That said,
and what's interesting too is when the children were dying, when they were sickened by the very dirty milk from inner cities, this phenomenon wasn't happening out in the countries where the cows were outside on grass.
No, they weren't. It was not happening. It had clean water and pastures, grass, sunshine, the right kind of conditions. Conditions matter. You're right. And so that said, raw milk did kind of go in parallel with pasteurized milk up until the 40s and 50s. And then remember in 1940s and 50s, nuclear bombs solved social problems, and DDT was good for your skin and smoking was good for your lungs, right? That was 1940s. We didn't really have a lot of appreciation for Mother Nature, nutrition, concern for chemicals, pesticides, and we were basically we were running the world, and we were in charge, and we could spray things with pesticides and do all kinds of crazy stuff and get away with it. Well, we didn't get away with it for that long. We got away with it for a little while, and then in the last 30, 40 years, we've started to pay the price of that, not respecting nature and Mother Nature's blueprints. Now people are starting to respect that.
Because in short terms, pasteurization is just an excuse to produce dirty milk, and that doesn't safeguard anybody. I know that no food is completely safe, but when you pasteurize milk, it doesn't ensure safety. And the same thing goes with other foods. I mean, nobody is inherently 100% safe from cantaloupes or strawberries or almond milk or whatever the food may be. And yet what is very much a double standard, Mark, is when I hear about food poisoning from cantaloupes, strawberry, almond milk, those foods don't get banned. And yet they banned raw milk. It shouldn't have ever happened, not to the farmers who were producing milk properly. So it's just such a double standard what's happened to raw milk. It's been so wrongly demonized.
That's correct. And it becomes a force of politics. And when you've got huge amounts of money behind the processing industry that doesn't want to have their market share taken away from, it becomes a major force. Because remember, anytime you want to change society, change who gets the money. So if the farmer gets well paid and his farm workers that are doing the work on the cows and all that stuff is well paid, that's a paradigm shift. Because the processors are the ones that are making money on the pasteurized milk side. The farmers are not. We're losing 5.5 dairies a day in America right now. And it's really, really quite tragic because it just makes for bigger and bigger dairies. And no regard for safety because they don't have to worry about that. It's like you said, pasteurization is an 18th century solution to an 18th century problem, right? You've perpetuated that problem by not having to worry about being clean. Well, on the raw milk side, the farmer has to be clean. He has to have the cows exposed to the right kind of environment. Clean water, pasture, sunshine, good bedding where the cows can lay down and not get all manure or covered in manure. And then you have to have clean standards and rapid chilling and testing and all those kinds of wonderful things to have good, wonderful raw milk, which is a fantastic immune food, gut microbiome recovery food, anti-inflammatory food of the ages, which is now being rediscovered by those that are now suffering the last 60 to 70 years of literally eating toxic crap in their diets, having their gut on fire because the inflammation is so severe and chronic disease is now rampant. So we're having to go back to go forward in terms of how we get our nutrition together and get our gut microbiome squared away.
Now, speaking about gut microbiome, what are people saying about the health benefits of raw milk when they transition from, say, pasteurized milk to your milk?
The classic story, and we heard so many this last week because our quarantine was just lifted on the bird flu. We were literally out of business for 6 weeks. When there was no illness associated with bird flu and raw milk, by the way, none. But the bottom line is, we heard our customers come through, and they were coming in to buy the milk. They're driving for 3 hours from Los Angeles to come to our dairy because they didn't want to wait for the trucks to drive to LA. They had to get the milk. They said, I was breastfeeding my child, and I didn't have your milk, so I had to give pasteurized milk, and the child was so sick. And I got milk from a friend of mine who had a goat, and it all went away. That kind of story. Or, I had terrible acne last year, and your raw milk made it all better. After a few months of being on raw milk, the acne went away. And when your raw milk wasn't available, I started having some problems. And it wasn't just the face, but it was also the gut. The digestibility of pasteurized milk is very low. So we were hearing time and time, my child's asthma was starting to have a little bit of an issue over that month and a half with your raw milk. It wasn't available. And we were drinking pasteurized milk. We couldn't do it. We had to stop. We're just praying that you would have your raw milk back. But the basic things that raw milk has in it, the big values, are based in the bioactives. Now, there was a big study, and this is a landmark study, a hugely important study. It was done in 2021, funded by, check this out, the National Dairy Council. Not the raw guys. This is the pasteurized guys. And they basically said that post-COVID, people are looking for foods that are non-inflammatory, that build an adaptive and resilient immune system in the gut. It's easily digestible, all these things. And they found that these bioactives found in unprocessed milk are destroyed by heat and by homogenization and processing. And what they wanted to do was go into unprocessed milk and extract all these bioactives and make some new pill or potion or patented food to make money. And it's like, are you insane? Why don't you just clean up the act of the milk itself, which is what we do at Raw Milk Institute, what we do at our farm, and what Mike does up in Canada. But the bottom line is, these bioactives are destroyed in pasteurization. And they include, here are some of the interesting bioactives. They are the milk proteins, which have an accompanying enzyme. All the milk proteins have enzymes. That's why pasteurization is so effective to extend shelf life, because these enzymes help digest the proteins over time if you don't keep the milk cold. Lipids. The fats are incredibly important. There's 60% of the bioactives are carried on the butterfat globule itself. Enzymes, including the alkaline phosphatase enzyme, which is very anti-inflammatory. Functional and bioactive peptides. Raw whey proteins, which are very heat sensitive, which stabilize mast cells, which keep histamines from going around and triggering asthma. Very anti-inflammatory. A-lactoalbumin, which is a protein. Lactoferrin, growth factors, milk fat globule membranes, which are very important, destroyed in homogenization, by the way, and oligosaccharides. Those are just some of the bioactives. Now, what are the effects of these bioactives? They include antihypertensive effects. And I'm reading from the study from 2021, the Cornell University study here. Antihypertensive effects, anti-tumor effects, anti-inflammatory, antiviral viruses are very much inhibited by the antiviral components. anti-carcinogenic, anti-cancer, immunoregulatory effects, probiotic, prebiotic, and postbiotic effects, remineralization of bones and teeth. So you can tell that these are really, really important themes that we're missing in our diets in America and in Canada today. And so if our country and our leadership wants to have a healthier population of citizens on planet Earth, we should be looking at these kinds of nutritional attributes as far as the gut microbiome, which is 80% of the immune system, which is the seat of our health. I find this extremely compelling because it came from the pasteurized guys that are just being honest with themselves.
Yes, and if you get into your position at the FDA, there's lots you can do to improve the whole situation throughout the country. I
Sure.
think people know about raw milk. Whether or not they have access to it or take the extra step to actually buy it is a whole other question. But if it is more available, I think people would be more drawn to it. I think I've read there are about 1 million regular consumers of raw milk. That's a very, very small percentage of the population.
Yeah.
Yet, of course,
It's
over 100 years ago, it would have been 100% of us drinking raw milk from, unfortunately, some from very suspect sources.
Yeah.
But we thrived. We thrived for thousands of years on raw milk. And as long as it was properly produced, we grew and developed and we didn't get sick from it, more than likely.
Yep.
So
Well,
it's
I
really
think that
tragic what's happened to this. And it's basically all because of greed.
it is. It's about greed, and we have a money-making machine in America more than most countries in the world, unfortunately, because of our pharmaceutical interests and medical interests, which put profits over people. And that's just a greed thing that's just been enculturated into us. I will say that it's really, really important to understand that as the normal consumer out there that eats the standard American diet has a very compromised immune system and has missing structures in their gut. The mucosal lining is thin or missing in many Americans, which causes a lot of intimal lining infection and inflammation in the gut, ulceration like Crohn's or celiac, that kind of thing going on with leaky gut syndrome. So a normal healthy gut would have a strong mucosal lining with the Akkermansia bacteria active and be fed that right kind of food so that mucosal lining can actually be created, because it's created by the bacteria eating the right kind of food. Whole food nutrition creates that bacterial mucosal lining. If you don't have the mucosal lining, then a pathogen that may be totally fine for somebody who has a strong gut will go directly to the tissues of the intestinal lining itself instead of the mucosal lining, and actually cause the Shiga toxin reaction and hemolytic uremic syndrome and toxic shock and all kinds of crap from sepsis. So we're missing some of the gut structures. So as we go from recognizing that raw milk's a phenomenal food and these other whole foods are important as well, we have to understand that we have a lot of work to do to walk back through the valley of the shadow of death here, because we've come to such a bad place where a pathogen or two could make you sick when a normal healthy gut wouldn't. So we have to be really on our game here as we cautiously and carefully walk America and citizens around the world back to a healthier gut, because we're missing some of those gut structures.
Now, you're well respected all over the world, Mark, and I know you've done a lot of trainings. You've been around the world teaching other farmers how to produce raw milk safely. Can you talk to me about some of the training programs that you've done in various countries and how well received the information is?
Well, we're not the raw milk police. We've always said we're not the raw milk police. We're not here to tell you what to do, but we're here to help you and mentor you with the best practices we have learned from all over the world on wherever raw milk's being produced. And we've learned from the mistakes being made, and we've also applied a lot of the technologies. One of my most proud moments was training 165 farmers in Great Britain. Back in 2018, two of our board directors, Dr. Bars and Dr. Berg, Dr. Katarina Berg, actually traveled to Great Britain, and over a 3-week period of time, trained 165 of their farmers there, because the Food Safety Agency, their equivalency of the FDA, were having a lot of failures in their pathogen tests, and they're having issues. And that was because we figured this out in about 15 minutes, by the way. It was really very, very fast to figure out. We figured out that what they were doing was they had very low milk prices in Great Britain. And so what they'd do is they'd milk all their cows in the bulk tank, and then they'd sell some of the milk off of that bulk tank to the public. And what they weren't doing was they were not separating the practices for raw milk for pasteurization versus raw milk for human consumption. So the same sloppy standards they were using for pasteurization, they were using for raw milk for human consumption. We said, wait a minute, stop the show. Separate your 10 best cows, bring them in first, milk them into a bucket, bottle that milk and chill it separately, and never combine that milk with the other 300 cows you're milking where the manure's getting in there and having all kinds of problems with mastitis because they're two different standards. And when they started doing that, the problems diminished to next to nothing. So they were combining standards between pasteurized and people, and we separated them, and that was very important. It's basically understanding from grass to glass all the practices, the water quality, the cleaning of the udders, the nutrition of the cow, how rapidly you chill the milk. Is it 2 hours or is it 2 minutes? You rapidly chill raw milk. So all these practices, how clean are your milking systems? How well maintained are your milking systems to assure that things are done right from grass to glass? And when you do that, you get extremely clean, beautifully diverse milk, biodiverse milk with all these bioactives there that is delicious and lasts a good 20 to 21 days without a problem, without becoming sour. And souring process is not dangerous. It's just the activity of the lactobacillus bacteria and other bacteria that like to ferment to try to become kefir. So, long story short, we're really, really proud. We started the Raw Milk Institute in 2011. We trained over 1,000 farmers nationally and internationally, many in Canada, by the way, which you'd be very proud of. And we've actually certified about 50 of them. I think 49 are certified right now. They actually have a place on our website. So the people consumers can see what their farmer's doing when they're not there. They don't just have the white picket fence with pretty roses up front. They actually, what's going on inside of the cow and inside of the bacteria and all that, the counts and everything. And you can see the results of their testing on the website. So you get to know your farmer more deeply as you trust that farmer to nourish your family. So we're very excited about that and the work I'm doing with RFK and the Make America Healthy Again. And I don't know that it's healthy again. I don't know that it was ever really that healthy in the last 60 years, but Make America Healthier for sure will be based on some of the technologies we actually refined at the Raw Milk Institute and the tens of thousands of bacteria counts we have reflecting the standards we use for raw milk for human consumption versus raw milk for pasteurization. And we have that data, which we can drive good decisions with good data.
Well, the testing is a lot easier today, too, isn't it, than, say, 10 or 15 or 20 years ago? Yeah. I know that you had some problems initially, and back then the testing wasn't as convenient or as easy as it is today. So, yeah, consumers can see the results of these tests. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the testing, how it has changed, how it has improved, because if, for example, people want to see the data, it can be made available on somebody's website, or if people want to join a cow share, they can be really heavily involved in the farm itself and observe and make sure that the farmer is undertaking healthy practices. So, yeah, if you can talk a little bit about the testing, that would be great.
I'm a big believer that there are more than one way to do raw milk right. I think it's very much a local decision based on where you are. If you're in Maine or up in Ontario and you got snow and ice on the ground, it's going to be completely different than if you're in Arizona, where it's warm and hot and dry. So it's very much a local thing. That's like I said, we're not the raw milk police. We don't come and tell you what to do. We're just saying that farmers in this set of conditions generally use these kinds of practices because they're more effective than farmers in these conditions, which are more effective because of what's going on there. So coliform testing is one of the most basic ones to do. And that is, it's a sanitary indication of how clean your milk is in terms of if you've done anything after the cow. A healthy cow will shed basically 1 coliform per milliliter in her milk. Very, very clean. 0 to 1 is a very common number to find. But it's not uncommon to find extremely high levels of coliform in the bulk tank. What does that mean? That means mankind screwed up the milk. So the bottom line is, we don't want to screw up the milk. We want the milk to be as clean and pure as possible coming out of the cow. So that means that you have to clean the udder, prepare the udder. You have to strip the teats. You've got to do all kinds of stuff there. You have to have very clean milking machines. You have to make sure you don't have biofilms built up in the milking machines, which is very common in a pasteurized milk environment because they're not worried about quality. They're not worried about standards. They're just, everything goes because it's all going to commingle together with your neighbor's milk and get dumped into a big tank. It's going to get cooked 2 or 3 times. So that's excusing that 18th century filth, by the way. So what we want to do is have really clean milk from well-trained farmers that goes from the cow to the consumer without adding additional bacteria from the environment and preserving it with very cold environment, very cold temperatures to chill the milk. And that results in extremely clean, delicious milk, which is highly healing with lots of bioactives in it, which are very good for the gut and the body whole in terms of health.
And so when you talk about,
25,
yeah,
25 years ago,
go
Pam,
ahead.
25 years ago, this testing technology wasn't even available for the farmer. You couldn't do Petri film testing on the farm 25 years ago. It started maybe 10 years ago you could do it. And now for $1,000, you can invest in a small on-farm lab to do Petri film testing and coliform testing and standard plate count testing for $2 a test. Cheap, easy, fast, and get the results into 18 to 24 hours. We've gone a step beyond because we are in such an incredible liability place with 500 stores and thousands of people consuming our products that what we do is on-farm pathogen testing. We're the only farm in the world that does that, only one. And we have a Thermo Fisher lab, and we've hired 2 full-time microbiologists from Fresno State University, new graduates, and they run our lab. And so within 20 hours, we have an enrichment process for Campylobacter, Listeria, E. coli, and Salmonella, and we get the results on that at a PCR, which is a needle in the haystack. A needle in the haystack. And we do that testing every day on every batch of all the milk. And we can make a choice. Okay, we found a little trace amount of pathogens. That's going to go to cheese and be aged 60 days versus going to fluid milk for human consumption. And we get that data before the milk ever gets bottled. So that kind of decision thing is now available. It's not cheap. It's not easy. But those that really want to serve a massive amount of people could do that. Those that want to serve fewer people, we recommend a different threshold of intensity or rigor. It's just not needed. When you're not milking 1,000 cows, you're milking 10 or 20 or 30. It's just a whole different level of exposure to risk and management of risk. So we believe in a multi-tier program in terms of what's going on with food safety.
Now, you talked about the bird flu a little while ago. As I told you in another call that you and I had, I wrote the book, The Great Bird Flu Hoax with Dr. Mercola. And back in 2006, when I was doing research for the book, the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, was really going after the small producers in British Columbia, when the problem was actually coming from these large factory farms in Fraser Valley in British Columbia. And the farmers were so upset by these attacks because their birds were healthy, their flocks were healthy. They were outside in the sun getting the fresh air. There was nothing wrong with them. They weren't sick. And the propaganda coming out of the media was that, oh, we have to attack these small farmers, the source is coming from these healthy birds in these backyard flocks, or it's coming from migrating birds, or, just to take everybody's attention away from how incredibly toxic these factory farms are. At any rate, the farmers got so upset that they stood at the end of their driveways with guns. And if the CFIA came anywhere near them, they would just say, leave our birds alone. And eventually, I think they did. But it's amazing, the attacks, the irrational attacks that are going on surrounding small operations, where the animals are being treated properly, the animals are healthy, but they try and shut people down, these innocent farmers, they try to shut them down. And like you said, you were shut down for something like 6 weeks, you mentioned earlier.
6 weeks.
When the problem is these filthy, disgusting factory farms. It's crazy how this world works.
It goes deeper into that. The regulatory standards created for management of H5N1, HPI in America, which is the highly pathogenic avian influenza, were based in PCR study. And PCR, if anybody knows anything about PCR, the polymerase chain reaction testing, and the cycle times for that, it cannot detect viable virus. It only detects genetic material. In fact, the PCR machine itself actually pasteurizes to break the proteins up so you actually get to the DNA and actually be able to look at the RNA information to see if a virus had been there before in viable form, and now it's tested as non-viable because it can't be viable once it's been blasted apart. So, long story short, the PCR testing that's been done does not reveal whether the virus is viable or non-viable. It only detects genetic material. They tested our milk and found some virus genetic material, PCR. But when you look at raw milk, which is fascinating, there's huge studies on this. Stanford did a big one. There was another study done that showed that virus is non-viable in raw milk after literally a few hours or a day. If you have a cow that's producing a virus in her milk, which she can, we've seen that. But if the milk is held at 40 degrees temperature, which is normal refrigerated temperature. Within 2 days, 99%, literally 90% of that milk is, the virus is non-viable, cannot cause infection. And within 3 days, it's out to 5 logs or 4 logs, 4 to 5 logs of decrease, which is equivalent to or exceeding what pasteurized process does. So we know in California that our milk is distributed. It takes 3 to 4 days to go from the teat to the consumer, because it's got to go into our plant, it's got to be bottled, put on distribution trucks, go out to stores, and then it's got about 16 days left by the time it gets to the stores, but it takes 4 days to get there. Well, look at the science. The fact that there's no viral, the infectivity of the virus is gone within 3 days. So there's no way that anybody could ever be in contact with a virus which would cause infection. Now, that's one part of the story. The other part of the story, that's the science. The other part of it's also the science, which is there's never been a human illness associated with raw milk and bird flu. Never, ever on the face of the earth. It is a respiratory illness, not a GI tract illness. It is not like norovirus, which causes GI tract problems. It's not cytomegalovirus, like herpes. This is a influenza A virus, which does not communicate through the gut or food. It goes through the deep tracheal membranes of the respiratory tract. So the idea that they're trying to create some kind of a criminal offense to the raw milk dairymen, when there's been no history of it for the last 50 years of study, is insane. In fact, the primate studies where they do primate knock shows that they don't get sick either. Now, we know that there's been a few cats, and they think that maybe cats ingest milk differently because maybe they inhale it or they get it in the respiratory tract. We don't know. But no human infections at all. So it's very interesting that the only human infections we've seen are the people working with really sick cows. And when they have a sick cow, sometimes the cow do really, really well by drenching them, which is giving them 5 gallons of water, aspirin, probiotics, and some gut stimulants like yeast down into their gut with a hose. Well, the cow doesn't like that. So you have to wrestle her down with your hand around her neck and this hose going down her. When you do that, the mucus on her nose can get in your eyes. And so about 60 people in America, all farm workers, all dealing with drenching cows, got some conjunctivitis, and the conjunctivitis resolved within 3 to 4 days, all by itself, without no other complications. When the CDC went out to test those people for antibodies, guess what? They were immune to HPI, immune to H5N1. So you can see how this is a major thing. The backstory is this. Here's the backstory. Moderna, the big vaccination development company, right? Their stock was $452 a share in the peak of COVID. A few weeks ago, it was down at 35, 40, something like that. They lost 90% of their share value. They were begging the FDA to create a vaccine in preparation for HPI. It's going to get us all. We've got to have a vaccine, because their stock value had plummeted and they were going to go bankrupt because there's no business post-COVID. There's no more vaccinations to create. So our FDA, bless their souls, gave them $176 million in August to create an HPI vaccination when there's not even an HPI that can make humans sick. So I find this fascinating to watch pharma freak out, beg the FDA for a bunch of money, get that money to save them to create a new pandemic that doesn't exist. So there you go.
I know. I hope people are getting savvy to what's happening.
Swear to God. Can't make it up. Can't make it up.
I mean, I can have multiple viruses in me right now. Am I sick? Are they active? Or if I do get sick, maybe they detect a virus in me and it could be a bacteria that's making me sick. I mean, the idea of correlation that doesn't always equal causation is also a factor in some of this as well.
Of course. Well,
I say to people, if you want to be healthy, you got to go out in the sun and build your vitamin D naturally. You got to get fresh air. There's all sorts of things you can do. So you have to honor what's called, and you do this every day, Mark, you honor the terrain theory. It's all about the terrain.
I have to take you to a conversation I had with Dr. Marcus Iggy. Marcus Iggy is a pediatrician, epidemiologist, and he works in Germany. And I met him at Cork, Ireland, when I was attending the International Milk Genomics Consortium, which I attend every year, by the way. I'm the only farmer in the room, surrounded by PhDs, and I just love it because I learned so much. But Dr. Marcus Iggy and I had lunch together in Cork, Ireland, and He said, Mark, we studied thousands of children over 10 years, and they consumed raw milk, and we saw fewer fevers, fewer influenzas, fewer colds, less asthma, sore throats, fevers, all these kinds of things that are immune related. He said, but you know what, Stig? None of those kids ever had a vaccination for the flu. He said, those kids drank raw milk from cows that produced fresh milk every day for 10 years. And that milk they produced was evolutionary. In other words, it changed every week or every year over those 10 years. It evolved and adapted to whatever the threat was on that year. So the cow is the great antibody factory for the current threat. And those kids consume that every year. And every year they had a very effective reduction of any kind of problem with flus, fevers, colds. That's not what happens when you get vaccinated, because when you get vaccinated, you're using part of last year's flu, and they're making a guess on this year, and maybe it works 20% of the time, and it always makes you sick. Whenever you get the flu vaccine, you get sick from it. Everybody does. I haven't heard anybody that doesn't. But the bottom line is, these kids didn't get sick, and they had an adaptive and resilient immune system for 10 years straight in the study. I find that fascinating because the cow adapted every year for the new raw milk. The new vaccination through the oral tract, through the gut, through that delicious raw milk was literally their flu vaccination versus getting shot. That didn't work and made a lot of pharmaceuticals money. So farmers over pharmacies all the way.
All the way. That's a fantastic, that's a great mantra to live by. Is there any new research coming up through the pipes about raw milk, the benefits of raw milk, even research around production? Have you heard of anything coming up through any of the big universities where the subject is simply getting more validation?
Universities in Europe, yes. University in the United States, no. The reason? The NIH, our National Institutes of Health, have forbidden any grants to be issued to anybody for research of raw milk. Because the FDA says, thou shalt not grant any money to anybody on raw milk because it's illegal and it's toxic and it's horrible. So you're not going to find any studies coming out of the United States anytime soon until maybe we get RFK in and we change those rules, which is one of the things I want to do, is allow for grants to be released for research on raw milk. We have one hell of a cohort in California of people to study, right? We've got a subset of 39 million people. We've got 150,000 of them that are drinking raw milk that have some common thoughts and feelings and health histories with raw milk. So why not study those and find out what the common theme is there? What a beautiful study to do. What a great cohort. It goes back 25 years. And now we have children born into raw milk parents. So that's where we need to go with this. And that's a beautiful thing. But nothing right now because it's illegal, unfortunately.
Now, there are resources for people to find raw milk. Sally Fallon is still very active in listing any farmers on her website, which is the realmilk.com website. Yeah. Are there any other sources people can turn to try to find raw milk?
Yes, there's the getrawmilk.com. There's the realmilk.com, which is Sally's work with West State Price, which is phenomenal. It's got an international map of all the raw milk producers around the world that have revealed themselves as raw milk sources, and whatever that might be. Cleopatra's bath milk in New Zealand or Australia, whoever it is, pet milk in Florida or in Canada. I don't know what you're calling it up there. I guess it's moonshine or something. But anyway, long story short, is that, yes, realmilk.com is excellent. Getrawmilk.com. Rawmilkinstitute.org has certified raw milk producers. And you know what? There's also the word of mouth. If you know somebody that drinks raw milk, where'd they get that milk? And then go do your own research to find out what that producer is all about. If the producer's been doing it for a while, they probably know about Raw Milk Institute. They probably know about other resources and have done a good job because they don't want to get sued for making somebody sick. Liability laws are kind of a secondary silent.
I always say we were hunter-gatherers in the past. You just have to be a 21st century hunter-gatherer to find raw milk.
There you go. That works.
No, I think I heard you say in an interview as well that you can get it on Amazon. That's news to me.
Amazon for 2 months this last spring had our pet milk products, pet products available. They immediately sold out and were short. And so they're backlogged in terms of back-ordered. And it was a kind of a subset of the KeHE organization. KeHE is a big distributor of dairy products and food products in America, organic stuff. And so they were doing Amazon backstage work in terms of fulfillment. I don't know that they're actually doing it now because it's so short. It's just been a run on raw milk. It's just the every farmer we've trained that we know about, and we have these big meetings every couple months where we talk as a group at Raw Milk Institute. They all report the same thing. Consumers are delighted, and they tell their friends. Their friends come and say they want it. So that when their friends come, that doubles your orders. So they really have a phenomenal growth. It's not sustainable at this point until we get some better regulatory change to allow for raw milk and support of farmers. Support the farmers as well. We're losing so many farmers in America. This is a great way to reinitiate a wonderful generational change for healthy farmers.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I don't want my food to come from China. We need to preserve our food supply here in North America. It's just that simple.
Thank you.
So
I
we
agree.
have to support local farmers. No question about it.
Totally agree.
Any last
100%.
parting words, Mark, about your operation, your raw milk, your products, anything that we may have overlooked speaking about?
No, I think you've touched on most everything. I do know that we're growing rapidly at over 1% per week. And we actually have 3 dairies now to support our operations. We're actually building out a 95,000 square foot plant to do our cold storage, cheese making, and all the stuff there. We are so crowded after our fire we had on our creamery 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, that we actually had to move into a smaller operation. But now we're growing into a much bigger operation, and that used to be a fruit packing plant, which is now out of business. So they're delighted to have us, and we're delighted to have them. And we're continuing to do farmer consumer outreach and train other farmers. This is a we project, not a me project. And so all of us together will serve all of us together.
That's fantastic. And I wish you the best of luck. I really hope you get your position with the FDA, because as I said earlier, I think you're going to be a great asset to the entire food supply in the United States, and that will reflect itself here in Canada as well. So all the best to you, Mark, and your family, and keep up the great work.
I hope that there's a very positive international ripple effect, because I believe Canada could be one of the best raw milk producers in the world because they have such good, strong dairies. But the bottom line is you need to have a cottage industry that carves out to allow raw milk to go from farm to consumer. And that could be part of the supply management program. It could very well be there, a very proud part of it. So I wish the best for everybody in Canada as well. Thank you, Pam. You've done a great job today.
Thanks so much, Mark. The information in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. We are not licensed healthcare providers, and our content is not a substitute for professional medical diagnosis, advice, or treatment. For personalized health guidance, or if you have specific medical concerns, please consult a qualified medical professional. They can assess your individual health needs and offer recommendations tailored to you. By listening to this podcast, you agree to this disclaimer. We assume no responsibility or liability for actions taken based on the information provided here.